ESP.bet. Watch and bet live.
Okay, this is episode 8 of League's Next World Champion, the LCK show. Emily talks to me for approximately 60 to 80 minutes about League of Legends. All different names that there could have been for the show, but I went with the better one. I went with the one League's Next World Champion. Well, I have to say, you knew this would happen as soon as I had the hubris to call the show this, Emily. But even though I actually do think, like, despite that very, very, very minor road bump for Kingzone, they do look fucking unreal. Like, I still think that they are just going to be like one of the best teams ever, win LCK, win MSI, maybe even win Worlds. I don't know if they keep going that long. It's always hard to know in Korea, because usually the team that actually is the best in the spring isn't the best by the time Worlds comes. But with all that said, I have to say, when I watched some games to prepare for the LPL episode of Narrative Wake I just did, the LPL is pretty fucking good. Some of those teams at the top, like IG, and I think they could beat some of these second and third first teams in Korea. So I am getting a little bit concerned that obviously the universe will make a mockery out of this fucking title the very first time, because, you know, that's always been the problem, Emily. I know it never happened usually with SK Telecom, but the big problem at Worlds is my fear was never that, like, Koreans won't be good enough to win it. It was always that the most likely team to beat a Korean is another Korean team. So all you need is, like, someone like KT Rolster to beat Kingzone at Worlds and then just fuck up and shit the bed themselves. So if that ever happens, then they don't win, and then the bloody Chinese get to win after all, don't they? Not just because fucking Koma's throwing in his team picks.
Invictus Gaming, like, storms ahead of KT, like, rookie gets it revenge against his old team.
Could happen. That's what people don't realise because they don't watch LPL. That could happen. So
no, IG is so, like, on the previous episode, you asked me who I'd want to see go up against Kingzone, and it was IG.
I mean, yeah, another team that's just amazing at fucking rocking the first half of the game. Right, okay, so now that we've actually bigged up the LPL, considered blasphemy in LCK circles, but we did it anyway. Obviously, usual host Thorin, usual co-host Emily Rand, who... Actually, I just want to reference this, because I did reference this. I was telling this to, I don't think I said it on air, I think I was telling like Kelsey. Right, you know, for International Women's Day, she took that clip out of the end of that Narrative Wake episode we did, where I tell you about ridiculous anecdote of where Kelsey, like, defended the fact that I'm not a sexist, and then someone, like, you just did the most next level sort of like mind game where they were like, but maybe he just works with women to control them further, which is like, okay then, because obviously, like, that's so fucking far down the rabbit hole. It's like, at that point in time, you can just argue anyone's a sexist for anything, can't you? Like, so when I made this point, right, the joke obviously was at the end of the episode that because I had both you and Kelsey on the episode, and obviously most of the episode is like comparing and contrasting each other's questions, it is sort of like, as a joke, it is sort of like that scenario. But the problem is, right, Emily, I just want to clear this up now, right? Because you don't respond and you don't say anything to the comment in it, people can only see your reaction. And people don't know this about you, right? But you react as though you are absolutely disgusted by what I'm saying. But as though, like, from my side, as though you're actually realising it's true. And actually, I do just, like, I am just some shadowy figure who just manipulates the careers of women in esports. But what people don't know is that is just your face for when you're really confused by something and you're listening to it. Because I know, because Monty used to have his own face, if you've ever seen it, where if he's ever, like, confused by something someone's saying, he has the most, like, pained expression on his face, like his brows all furrowed up, you know. So I just want to clarify that Emily is not here against her will. She understood that was a joke.
It looks like I'm in prison already. I'm, like, plunging into my couch, you know.
I have surrounded your house with explosives and you're not allowed to leave until we have completed one whole season of a show about LCK. That's the only reason why she watches MVP versus Kongdu Monster. She doesn't watch our choice. You know, I set off the landmines if she doesn't do that. So, right, our guest for this episode is Nuddle, who is the head coach of KaBuM. Now, let's just address a few things here, okay? So, KaBuM, you're probably thinking, oh, wait, that team from Season 4 Worlds who beat Alliance.
Alliance, yeah.
Yes, it was Alliance. Now, yes, that is technically the organisation he works for. But all I'm going to say is this. That was Season 4 Worlds. That was 2014. So, since 2014, no Brazilian team's done anything else. All they've done is get the odd upset. So, I'm just saying, in history, we all know that was just a mad upset. It wasn't legit. And also, I've referred to this many times in the past, there was some fuckery with that Lions team. They'll never admit it, but there was. So anyway, getting into the specifics of the man. By the way, in the CB LOL, it's qualified for the playoffs. They've got a gauntlet system as well, so they're in first place. I noticed they were technically tied for first place with someone else in terms of overall record. And to be fair, I could see an argument where Red Cannons actually was probably the better team, because here's the thing. They started out with the training weights on. They had Broken Shard, and then eventually they were like, right, we gave you a head start. We're going to get rid of him now. Now we're going to play for real. Now here's the thing. I actually sort of I have a soft spot for Broken Shard, but everyone has to get the work. You know that. Everyone has to get the business, Broken Shard. So you fucking lived by the memes, Broken Shard. You will die by the memes. That's what happens. Now, Nuddle, if you want some more background on him, first of all, the fact he's on this show is because I like to test these guys, these characters who come from outside of Brazil and go to Brazil, because they all think by going to Brazil, I've made this point many times before, they all think they're going to sort of show well, fuck it, I'll show what a sick coach I am, because everyone knows that, the Brazilian teams aren't the best. But imagine if I could, first of all, be dominant individually, domestically, and then, go to international and do something really good. Fuck that. Never works out for any of us, does it, that part? Well, anyway, can I still have a job in the ULCS? Please. I'll coach anyone, please. So you haven't gotten to the third stage there. You're entering stage 2, hopefully, if you can win this CB LOL, if you can go to the international tournament. So good luck to you. I hope you make it where everyone else failed, like all those sort of bones below that rope ladder thing that Bane's Pit had, where they had to kind of jump out, And that's the problem. They're always ready to go back to use the analogy, they're ready to go back to CB LOL and just dominate there again. But you have to be willing to let everything go in order to escape the pit. You have to be just ready to forget the Brazilian scene and just embrace international League of Legends. I think if GAM has shown us anything, it's that. And if you do that, though, it will destroy your whole scene, because all the coaching staff, all the good players will just get taken by LCS teams. And so, much like GAM, you'll be hard reset. So, that kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't. Another final detail about Nuddle, because everyone needs to know this, is he is one of those people who's like a French Canadian, and I'm always suspicious when I hear that, quite frankly, because you're French, not really French though, sort of French, but also in Canada, a country which is best known for being not like America and not like England, but you're French within that and don't quite think of yourself as fully Canadian. You think you're in your own country. Right, already I'm that's like you're 4 layers deep in a spy movie already just by being born. So I always have my suspicions about those people. I'm just going to tell you off the bat, they were all cheaters in Counter-Strike. Almost everyone who was ever from French Canada and whoever was good was an onliner or a cheater. Sorry, just a fact. I know the scene quite well. So we're not going to hold that against you though. Listen,
that's fine.
You painted yourself into a corner with your life choices. You come from French Canada. You're living in Brazil. You're trying to coach your team. You're dreaming of international success. I say good luck to you, but thankfully, it's something I've actually celebrated many times. Luck doesn't matter in life, just winning in the video games. And good thing about video games is they don't care who you are, as all the Korean match fixing in many different esports games will have shown us over the years. So let's start the episode. So obviously, we have to start the episode with Kingzone DragonX, a team that we've talked about many, many times because they have literally led the fucking LCK. Aside from the first match, they have basically been the best team from, in English we say, from pillar to post, from racing, like horse racing. It just means you were in the lead the entire time, basically, and no one was going to catch you. So at this point in time, I feel like it's already a given that Kingzone wins these matches. At this point, there's 2 factors that I watch for. One is how humiliating can they make it for the opponent? And then 2 is, can Khan just do literally everything he wants? Is there actually any restriction? As far as I can tell, they're living up to both those conditions every week I watch them. So, Nuddle, give us your fresh take, because we haven't talked to you about it here. What do you think of Kingzone DragonX?
Well, can you make it more humiliating than Jenner winning in 22 minutes with Anivia and Jigs, though? That is a good question. Probably one of the fastest win with a very late scaling comp. But overall, when you look at KZ, to me, they have the best and smartest jungler in a sense that he just understands the game. He knows every resources that his team need to accomplish what needs to be done on the map. And if you look at them play this way, they just have the best early game, but it's not just about early game right now. They're playing 8.4, where there's something called Baron and Banner of Command.
Sure.
And they just get 20 minutes Baron. This morning, I think they were in the pit at 19:59. Just said, all right, come to us. We'll team fight you. We'll get Baron. And if you don't want to, we're just going to win in the next 5 minutes. So I don't think they can humiliate people more than this because they're just deciding where the game is being played. And that's something that no one else in the region is really willing to do at the moment.
And Emily, KT's supposed to be the team that can snowball the early game. This just crushes, like, it's almost like Kingzone just wanted to be like, you know what, we've made this actual season fairly boring from our side because we just style on everyone, but we're just going to ruin the playoffs as well. Like, don't bother watching the final when KT gets it. We're going to win anyway, so, like, what hope have you got after this? It's pretty rough, wasn't it?
I'm always, like, super hypercritical of KT anyway, but I think with Kingzone, what happened was, or what frustrated me from KT is that they prioritized the Xayah and Rakan, but then did not play around their bottom lane, because I think if there is one way that you can try to beat Kingzone, it's by destabilizing their bottom lane, actually, which was true of them, you know, at the World Championship as well. The reason why they're so much better now, to his point, is that Peanut is like so much better of a jungler than Cuz is, so it just automatically shores up so many of their issues. And on this patch, Peanut is insane. Like, their first game on the patch was him absolutely dumpstering Blossom on it was their second game on the patch with the first series, was just him like absolutely dumpstering Blossom on Olaf. So I mean, this is a really strong meta for them. I think if there is one way you try to attack them, it would be through bot side, which KT did not do, despite in game one it looked like they were kind of drafting that way just based on their priorities. But yeah, they're reaching like historic win rate levels in LCK right now, which is, it's kind of, I mean, you've brought this up before, but like not a lot of people are talking about it, I guess, because they're not SKT. So,
yes.
But yeah, they're just absolutely insane.
I mean, that's obviously one of the problems, isn't it? Like, first of all, the name is brand new even for the org. Like, there was no Kingzone
DragonX,
so you haven't established it. And then beyond that, like, even though, most of these players are known now from Worlds, and obviously Pringles are legends anyway, they still don't have, like, sadly, this is one of the downsides of Faker existing, is no one else really has that same status. Like, because Mata went to LPL, he doesn't even have it, you know. Like, I think some of those guys actually would have had a chance if they stayed in Korea to at least have same iconic value to their name, you know. But I think that's definitely a factor, because you've got to kind of get casuals hyped to watch you as well. And that's where, unfortunately, Kingzone doesn't necessarily, to me at least, seem like they get the same hype, you know. What about this?
It is kind of sad because they're such a fun team to watch too. Like, they're very fast, they're very smart. Sometimes they get a little, you know, hyphy. But people like that, you know, like they can basically style on people and you know, make it look fun. And I don't know. I'm kind of sad that more people aren't talking about them outside of like the, you know, small group of fans that kind of watch LCK regularly.
Right, I've got a potential conspiracy theory to run by you here that might restore some of people's faith in the playoffs, which goes like this. So it was actually Cabra, a guy who was on one of the past episodes of our show, who brought this up, which was that he actually thought that this series, KT versus Kingzone, was disappointing, because he actually thinks that KT, because Kingzone are already first place anyway, you can't stop them being first place. You're probably going to play them no matter what in the playoffs because they're in first place. He actually thought that KT semi-fucked around in the draft, and that's why they picked Fiora twice for Smeb, which is obviously like a classic champion for him. But
classic Smeb pick.
It's not necessarily something to pick now, though, right?
Yeah, I mean,
it's played mid by fucking Hui or something, isn't it? So, like, what do you think that there's anything to that? Is it even plausible that they just didn't want to reveal anything in case they have to play them in like 3 weeks or whatever?
Well, the thing is, it's like, would you really want to do that to finish third or fourth? Because right now the rankings are pretty close, and if they finish third, I mean, they're gonna have to beat either KSV or they're gonna have to beat Afreeca Freecs. They're gonna have to win even more games to be able to reach their objectives. So it's like, do you really want to hide strategy? Just like if we were, in a sense, gonna be qualified as my team in CBLOL before playing the last week, I would have still played because my players need experience. It's not about always hiding information. Like, of course, they don't need that much experience, man. Very accomplished player, but people have been trying that Fiora build with the ancient coin, I think it is, that people have been just stacking gold, and I think it's a great test going into playoffs.
And
I do
also,
think that most people, by the way, who talk about that topic, like this is a good example because at least he gave like a legit example. Like, there's a pick that was a bit interesting here. Maybe this is why. But most people who do that logic of like, there's hiding strats. Like, you guys just grew up watching fucking anime. You think it's Yu-Gi-Oh or something, or like One Outs or something. They don't have some secret plan up the sleeve. They just play the game as best as they can and hope they win in video games. I think you've overthought this. There's not some 10 level. You've activated my trap card. Like, they haven't, have they? So come on, Emily.
I was gonna say, I think the things you see from KT here are like systemic things that you've seen KT and these players do, right? Like, what they did was they prioritized that bot lane. They didn't attack it correctly. Instead, they focused topside a bit more with Score kind of adjusted his pathing so he could basically power farm, which I liked, actually. But then, like, Smeb locking in Fiora has happened so many times. It happened, I believe, in their first series this year. And he also he locked it in against Ornn, I believe, when Ornn was broken, when these two teams met in the Kespa Cup finals. And so, like, if you're going to make that argument, it's very weird that all of these issues are things that KT already has, like, either problems with or has already shown in the past that this is something that they do. So I would disagree that they are hiding strats. I think this is just KT. If nothing they did surprised me last night, so
being as the only teams that they have to play remaining are, let's see, Jin-Air, KSV,
BBQ later this week, I think.
It's not on the. No, I'm talking about Kingzone DragonX.
Kingzone.
Yeah,
okay.
so Kingzone only has 2 more games, apparently. They play Jin-Air and they play KSV. Right? Do you, obviously, ignoring those teams, we'll just take those teams and the playoffs. Do you think anyone can actually beat Kingzone DragonX in the best-of-5 series?
Well, at this point, I think it's impossible, unless the patch changes dramatically. We could just hit a patch and they say, well, there's no more carry topside, there's no more vision topside. And the thing is, we're in a patch where top side of the map is very important. Even though teams are tending to play towards bot side right now, I think there's a big misconception by a lot of teams, at least in the rest of the world, because once you look at Korea, the 3 best teams all have the highest first brick rate in the top lane. And this opens up the top side of the map, which opens up to Rift Herald, which opens up mid, and then 20 minutes, Baron opens up, and you already have the entire structure down on that side of the map. Yeah, exactly. And then you have your banner, your Baron. We've already opened up the entire map, and you just reach win conditions that a lot of teams are not understanding. So it's like, when you watch Emily, sorry if it sounds like bad, but I mean, you look at Echo Fox in a sense where their bot lane is getting demolished right now, and they can't find the same impact that they want on the top side. But when you transfer that to Korea, their method didn't change. They don't play tanks. They still play Camille. They still play Fiora, Jace, and Gnar. And they just want to put that focus on this side of the map and try to understand the importance that it has on win conditions for teams on a patch like 8.4 and 8.5.
Because that was obviously one of the questions that throughout the other 7 episodes we did of this show, Emily, that I always used to ask, which was like, when each new patch comes in, will the meta change? Like, help a team? Will they have a better chance? This is actually kind of depressing if you're the other teams, because they were already dominant in the previous patches where the games used to last super long, and now, if anything, it might be even easier for them to win.
It buffs the jungle too. Like, I mean, we've seen it with Peanut, right? Like, they can play around him really well in the jungle, especially if BDD has mid priority, because now that they're communicating, he can just pretty much invade and take over an entire jungle if he wants to. So yeah, I mean, I still maintain that if you do try to attack their bot side, actually, which sounds counterintuitive on this patch, but it destabilizes them enough that you can win. I still think that's the way that you beat Kingzone, but I don't see any team that is prepared to do that right now. Either because they don't recognize that that's maybe another way to attack them instead of focusing on like counter BDD, or they don't execute it correctly, even if they draft to that strategy. So,
how did Smeb hold up in the top lane against Khan?
Did he even hold up?
He played Fiora into gameplay, like
willingly. He chose to do it.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
And also, I mean, I would assume as well there is a level of like, part of the reason I think he still picks that is because obviously he thinks that's like his champion, you know, that he knows the insides and out and he can do anything he wants with. So, it's not like anyone forced him to do this.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't like that pick, but I think like all things considering, he was, I don't know. I didn't like their draft, which affected the way he played.
Because obviously people are going to be looking.
I mean, like, because it's really difficult. Like, I still think Smeb is an excellent top laner.
Sure.
But I didn't like the Fiora. I didn't like even the way they played around him. I would have preferred him to pick something else that would kind of push Gangplank in so that they could possibly attack elsewhere on the map. But yeah.
Because
bringing this point forward, that's the thing. It's like when you're looking at KT and you have Deft in the bottom lane, like you said, I think it's a great aspect to try to attack it. But once we start talking about best of 5 with Peanut, I think they're a team that could just easily adapt. They would recognize that, maybe adapt their draft, which are very strong this split, obviously. Like you said, I think KT could have the tools to play towards bot side. But sometimes there's ego, sometimes there's strategy, history that just goes through the years, and you don't know it. It's like instead of maybe focusing on the Caitlyn pick, like Deft is probably one of the best Caitlyn in the world, if not the best with Yuzi, and it feels like they just pick it and don't really give him the tools, the vision to enable his champion at his max potential.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Here's the tough question then. So since it's almost certain that Kingzone, I mean, we already know they're in the final. They could absolutely win the split. They've been dominant thus far. Who do you actually think, for your money, Nuddle, who was the best player in Kingzone over the split?
Well, to me, overall, it's just Peanut, the way he controls the game. Like, I'll be honest, I have a little fanboy of jungling. It's in my opinion, one of the most impactful position in the game with mid, because the entire map starts from there. And if you're within a bot side meta and you can't control mid, your bot side won't matter. If you're on a top side meta and your top side doesn't do anything, it still won't matter anyway. So when you look at him, and back to the play where he played with Faker on SKT, at MSI, there were games where you would see him literally recall, run straight mid, ward, then do his jungle padding. And this is why Peanut, to me, is the person that controls the game for them. He just sets them up for success. He sets up Can so that he can play his matchup with Timely and just dominate and be probably the best laner in the world right now, I would say, for Cam.
Okay. Right, since we were talking about the Kingzone KT match, let's shift to talking about KT now. So, Emily, this is getting a bit depressing because after the SK Telecom win, all the pieces were in place for finally KT to become the true number 2 team in the LCK and to be like, right, okay, there's Kingzone, sure, maybe no one can beat them, but we're going to be the true number 2. We've got, obviously like the pedigree of the team is they should be that good. They beat SK Telecom, their nemesis, twice in the split. They got all these great matches behind them. They've even won a lot of like individual games, but now they lost KSV and they lost obviously now the big marquee match to Kingzone. So where do you see KT at the moment? What do you think? What's been the difficulty?
I think they're a solid third. I think part of the issue, kind of to my point about the Kingzone series, is that sometimes they'll draft kind of wonky, or they will draft for one specific thing, but then not execute on that in the early game. And so that will be an issue against teams that are as good as Kingzone. For KSV, it's really weird how KSV have seemed to have their number in like really important matches, and that wasn't necessarily an important match for KT, but it was a very important match for KSV because they were on this kind of huge skid before they beat BBQ earlier that week, and that was not a convincing win for them, in my opinion, even though it was 2-0. So KT, I mean, so they keep saying that they're more of a team, and I actually agree with that, weirdly enough. Even with Ucal coming in for Pawn, which I actually do like. I like that a lot because I think you already know what you're getting with Pawn, and at this point they can start to give him more experience, Ucal more experience rather. So I mean, obviously he has made some very obvious blunders, kind of like how Blossom's blunders are very like visibly obvious because he's a rookie. But I like that because I think having mid lane priority is just so important, and if Pawn plays and doesn't get mid priority, which is happening more often than not, I think that is a huge issue that they have recognized at least. So I am happy about that. But in terms of whether this team can win the finals, like, I'm not convinced whatsoever, especially since they don't even have like the creative flexibility that has been shown by a team like Afreeca, right? Who's our now like basically default number 2, although they do play each other next week as like the final match, which should be really interesting actually. But they haven't even shown like that kind of creativity around their team. So it makes them, in my opinion, like a definite third place right now. And I don't see them moving beyond that in the spring split.
Okay, right. Nuddle, what do you think of this switch to using Ucal as the mid laner? Because obviously Pawn, for the majority of the split, in fact, obviously the whole time he's been back in KT, he's been having the mid lane spot. But after this, they did like I think it was against it was like one game against SK Telecom, and then it was the series against Kongdu, the bad teams, when they tried out Ucal. But then they seemingly went back to Pawn, but I get the feeling that KSV series scared him straight, and they were like, right, let's just give this other guy a chance again. Right, obviously, he's a player we've criticised a lot on this show before, Pawn, because he does do a lot of very strange things. What do you think about this mid lane switch? Like, what do you think the logic of it is, or what it brings to the team?
Well, when I looked at Ucal's champion pool, what was interesting is the way he brings up his Azir. And like, obviously Azir right now is a champion that if you want to be dominant in a team and you want to grab bans, I mean, not anymore, he's not really ban worthy and even less on 8.5. But if he can play that champion to its maximum potential, play him up in the lane, drag attention, open up the map for his jungler, I think Ucal can do an excellent jump. And the 2 games he played on Azir, I think one of them he went 7-1, had like 3 Shurima shuffles, spectacular, one that literally opened the game for them. So when you bring him a new mid, it's always about the synergy. How will he play with his jungler? How will they manage to open the map? How will they move around the map? What can it create? Because mid and jungle creates space, and the space that you create on the map, you have to make good use of it. So with Ucal, can they actually make this? Like, can they actually play the Galio if this champion stops getting banned every game? I mean, we will surely know one day. And that's the thing. It's like we've only seen him play, I think, Ryzen Azir so far out of the 3 or 4 games. Oh, it's true, Tilia. But it means a lot of control mage, a lot of pressure. And like I said earlier, this is pretty much the core of the game. Whatever meta you're in, the game starts usually from mid. So if he can be able to set up his team for success like this, I think it could be a great addition. And like you said, we already know what Pawn can give. He's been on the scene for a while. So now that they're almost already locked for 2nd and 3rd, I think it's a great opportunity to maybe give themselves a chance against KZ. Not like we saw this morning, obviously. But I think there's obviously a lot of room for improvement. And young players, you never know how they'll react. Maybe under pressure, he'll become a better player. Maybe he will shine to his maximum potential, and only time will tell.
Okay. What about this then? As a coach, give me sort of your like how you would break down KT Rolster, because I always say this, okay? They always get talked about in all media as if they're this really underwhelming team, despite the fact that every split they have, 60, 70% win rate. They do win against pretty much everyone except the elite teams in the league. They always are in position to either go to the finals or to go to a Worlds, etc. But and also to throw this in as well, you would think with a team with this many star names that if you're not winning, actually people would start to impact the players. But actually, funnily enough, aside from Pawn, generally I still see people talk about all these other names as like some of the best at their position, still some of the best in Korea. So they're always an enigma as to why the team isn't better. So what's your take on what the flaw is? Because after this many splits now, almost 3 splits, it does seem like some of these issues are sort of like cooked in, as we'd say in English. Like, it doesn't necessarily seem like they're going to just overnight figure something out and have amazing synergy in team play. You know, what are the issues with KT from your perspective?
Well, from I will say a psychological perspective, to me in life, there are winners and there are losers. And when you're a winner, you always find a way to win. So you look at Faker back in his best years, even last year at Worlds, he literally always found a way to bring SKT up to the top until the final. Yes. When you watch KT play, to me, they always find a way to lose. And I think the best example is their series versus KSV. You looked at them play, they have the advantage, and they just sometimes just forget what they need to do to accomplish, like what they need to do on the map to really reach the next level. And at some point, it just reaches out to you. And that's, like we talked about Pain before the show, and to me, they're the best example that I can think of in the present, because this split, they always found a way to lose. They had good moments, and then they found a way to just crumble maybe under pressure. Sometimes pressure does wonderful thing or horrible things to people. So from that standpoint, I think KT, they need to just find a way to turn on a switch and become winner. It doesn't always come naturally. Sometimes you need help from the outside. Like we can talk about, there was like the Astralis when they hit their peak in CSGO, where they hired a sports psychologist, if I remember correctly. And they just had a little hop, and they won, I think, 1 major, and then had a fine streak overall. I'm not saying this is the only solution for KT, because sometimes it could just be one player swap. Like if you have stars in all 5 positions, it is very overwhelming for a jungler, in example, to just be warding every lane, because your win condition is going to change from every game. So as a team, if you look at KZ, for example, they have an identity. They have the most solid top side of the map, and they have one of the smartest and safest playing bot lane, which enables their top side of the map to control the game and win the games for them while their bot lane does what they have to do. And I think KT, this is something that is lacking, how everybody wants to be the one to bring KT to the championship, instead of being 5 individuals playing within one team with the object to win.
I actually thought that was quite an interesting point you made there about like the idea that using a sports psychologist, because actually, I mean, I don't want to speak out of school here because I'm not certain, but I'm almost certain I do remember some story about one team in Korea where because I remember someone once explained to me that in a sense the Korean coaching structure actually is behind some of the Western esports teams, because they still, like, obviously they pioneered that structure where you have like the strategic coach. So in the past it was Koma, and then you have the head coach who sort of like oversees all practice. He's more like almost like a manager of the team, you know. And within this structure, obviously they found a lot of success because actually Westerners, for a long time, didn't even have a coach. And then when they had a coach, they just had a coach who was basically just like an analyst. So they didn't have the head coach aspect. You know, the whole structure didn't even exist in the West. But I heard that what's interesting is, first of all, someone told me that in a lot of the Korean teams, like they make those coaches, like those coaches don't do a good enough job of delegating, basically. They just take all they still sort of think that structure is the way it has to be. So they just have like the 2 coaches sort of, and they maybe have like an assistant coach, that's it. But they don't necessarily use them as well as they could, like if you had a whole team under you, like some of the Western teams do now. And then on top of that, I think this person also, from what I remember, unfortunately I can't remember who it was, said something along the lines of that the Koreans don't believe in sports psychologists, or something along those lines. Maybe it was Weldon, I don't know. But I know that, like, I've never heard of a single instance actually in a big Korean team, in StarCraft or League of Legends, of them doing this, of actually trying to get some sort of like therapy, or someone even just to come in and, like, you know, try and problem solve with a team that has bad communication or something. So that is interesting, because obviously it's an area where I guess if you're the region that's always winning, maybe you think it's not necessary, but this would be surely the ultimate team to give it a try on, because you know that the talent level there, you could accomplish incredible things if you could overcome any of these sort of disconnects between the players, because that's what to me still exists and always has in this KT roster, is the disconnects between players. I mean, maybe the Ucal scenario can fix that, because as we've mentioned many times, Emily, obviously Pawn didn't really help matters in this particular team, because whereas in other teams he actually did a very good job as this sort of like weird distraction and a player that was dangerous. He doesn't actually bring that very much anymore because he's kind of degraded as a player, and that just doesn't fit the overall look of this squad anyway, the composition that they've got in this team, it seems.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to see. I would be curious to see what a sports psychologist could do with KT.
Well, like I said, it's not always about like sports psychology, just about a mindset. Like, I'll be honest, my team, we don't have the best team in CBL. I think we can all agree on that. But I have players who adapted, in a sense, a philosophy of discipline. And for us, it reflects into the game. And yes, of course, sometimes there are players who just want their ego stroke, who want to be the star, who want to carry. And to me, the weekend we played like that is the weekend we got completely demolished on 8.4 by Keith. So it's like, in a sense, it's not about leaving their ego. It's just about a mindset. Sometimes it's not about the way you win. People only remember winners. They usually don't remember how you win. They see your name on the trophy and they're like, oh, this team won that year. You never remember second, and you rarely remember how team wins. And I think KT, if just a mindset swap in a sense, could maybe fix most of their problems.
Okay, so now I want to talk about the team that has now surpassed KT again, which is the Afreeca team, who's now back in second place. And obviously, there'll be the big showdown between these two teams right before playoffs, which, as Emily alluded to, is obviously going to be very interesting because odds are it will also be the third place game that we will have. So we'll basically have like the games twice in a row. So when we talk about the Afreeca team, this is another team where you have to put it in the context of they're also doing roster moves. I noticed this season, more than any I've ever seen, involves even the top teams all doing, except obviously Kingzone only did it because they were forced to, but all the top teams aside from Kingzone basically fuck around with subs and try doing different comps, etc., and depending on form do it. So first things first with Afreeca, I noticed that they have been playing Mowgli, the jungler, more rather than Spirit, but they still play Spirit some of the time, and they did bring him in for the last game against Janair. What's going on with that, Emily? Like, do you think they're as a team? Because elsewhere, obviously, they had the whole scenario where they were bringing in Aiming over Kramer, but then he's just gotten suspended, so now he can't play. Right, what's going on with the sub situation? Because they were already a team that you just looked at the original starting five, it was pretty strong.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have been saying it's either to give Mowgli practice or to have Spirit be able to like watch the games, which I'm not sure how much stock I put into, like, because that's what people used to say about Blank, right? Yes. It's not like, oh, he's like, or Bengi as well. It's like, oh, he's downloading the game and then he's going to come in and like save the team, which I don't necessarily think is the case. I did think it was hilarious.
Anime plotline.
Yeah, I did think it was hilarious though that Mowgli played the Nocturne, because that's such a Spirit pick, and he's been practicing it, and for 8.5, presumably, but. I just thought it was funny because I saw Kelsey made a joke on Twitter where she's like Spirit is like trying to get more playing time, so he like sidles up to Mowgli and he's like, this is really good on 8.4 still, like you should try it out, and then they put him in for game 3 because the Nocturne got pretty stomped out pretty early. So but no, I mean, I think I'm not really sure why they're doing the jungle swap. I think they did want to try out and give Aiming more experience, despite the fact that I think Kramer is still better, even though I don't even think Kramer is like best in his position, but I do think he is a lot better than Aiming at this point. I think the thing I like the most about Afreeca is that they still try out some really weird oddball picks that always seem to work, but aside from like the Nocturne didn't work out. But like the Rise top I really like for Keen. I think that is smart and it's a cool flex. They've also done the Scion mid flex, which is now super popular with them in Kingzone, which Kuro has done previously, I believe. And historically, I think he did it with the Tigers. But yeah, that's the thing I appreciate the most about this team. So if any team is going to bring in substitutes to try stuff out, it seems like Afreeca has a really good handle on how to have those players communicate for that one game and having a pretty strong idea of what they're going to draft as well. So that's what I really like about the way they've used their substitutions, even though I can't really see a specific pattern for it, because I do think when push comes to shove, like Spirit is a better jungler than Mowgli. Kramer is a better AD carry than aiming.
Okay, what do you think about their Afreeca team, Nuddle?
Well, to me, they're the team that plays, I would say, one of the smartest team. It's like they're not a team that takes high risk. Like I was looking at their stats earlier, and they're the team with the least depth and the least skills in the LCK right now, which means their game plan is not always focused on, let's say, chaos. They'd much rather focus on playing a smart game. I think they're within a good meta where Kramer and Israel, I think to me, they go pretty well together. So in terms of bot lane, they have a lot of security. It kind of enables their composition a little because they have to put less resource on their bot lane, which, like I said earlier, allows to play on top side of the map, which is one of the best reality in this meta right now. But in terms of Afreeca Freecs, like I said, it's just about they never go for the full fireworks in a sense. I was watching their game this morning. They won, like I said, the game they won in 22 minutes. They just abused a mistake. The other team made a predictable play, which is the LPL way, let's say, of facing Gangplank, where they have a Gangplank, let's dive in level 3, 4, to 5. And they saw that play coming. The Anivia actually left lane on the Galio recall, expecting the TP top. Triple kill, quick snowball. And to me, that is Afreeca Freecs. They're a team that plays smart and plays calculated. They don't take the high risk. They're not the KZ who's going to run in the pit at 20 minutes. Like, yes, Spirit likes to invade every once in a while. I still wish he could play his Nidalee, but that's more for up to Peanut to play, I would say, at this point.
Okay. What about then? So one of the things that's been depressing is that every time one of these teams is in seconds, looking good, so KT obviously just did it, Afreeca did it a few weeks back, you hope when they go against Kingzone, they'll show us something, they'll show maybe they could win, maybe they could beat them. Do you actually think that if Afreeca it gets to the playoff finals and plays best of 5, is this the team that has the best chance, do you think, against Kingzone?
I think they'll get destroyed. Simply because, like I said, the top half of the map, I think they know how to play around it, but I think Peanut is on another level compared to the two junglers that he's going to be facing. And I don't know which patch the LCK is going to play on, but as crazy as it sounds, Olaf is buffed on 8.5. Because Riot, when they made the patch, didn't realize that he was already busted with Predator. And now we have a late game buff on Olaf, which gives him more power into the game, which just gets a free ban every game for KZ pretty much if you're on blue side. Otherwise, they're going to just pick it and roll you over like he's done in every game he's picked the champion so far.
Okay. I mean, it is, to go along with the stats you were saying about the kills and deaths, it is amazing that they've played 15 series and they've only lost 11 individual games. That is actually outrageous. So, I mean, yeah, another team that sadly, because they don't have the name value, isn't really getting mad hype in the West. You know, people love it when KT wins and they want to believe that they could be good, but that's why this is like an example of where it's sad that unfortunately MSI is only like the best team. If MSI was like a mini Worlds, it'd be so fun to see like how Afreeca Freecs would do against the best LPL teams and the best EU LCS teams and LCS. You know, I'd love to see that sort of a mix up to know where we're at before we get to Worlds. Because by Worlds, the team might not be as good, but just by virtue of other factors, you know, you have no guarantee you maintain this form until then, right? So, speaking of teams that haven't maintained form but are alive now. KSV somehow, right? Okay, SK Telecom didn't make it, Emily. They never did make the proper course correct and come back to life, you know. They still stayed down where they deserved to be. But somehow KSV has actually halted the slide. I mean, obviously, we just mentioned they beat KT Rolster. They're back in fourth again. They're actually in fourth by a decent margin now. They've basically secured playoffs. This is actually pretty big because when you saw where they were at even 2 weeks ago, this looked like it could be the end of KSV. Like they could just slide right out the playoffs, and then who knows where they would be at that point in time because you know they look like they have no answers in their roster. So, what do you think about KSV's return?
When I look at KSV, I always think of Crown, and then I think of their jungle situation. And what they decided to do recently was settle on finding picks for Crown in the mid lane, which they've found Vel'Koz. And also he also played Karma mid, but Vel'Koz is kind of like the primary thing that they've had him on into these year. And they also have pretty much settled on having Ambition be the jungler for the team. And that means they play slower. Like, I think it was in the Jin series where there were like 5 Gathering Storms between the two teams because, of course, it's KSV and Jin but they play slower with Ambition, but they also are good at punishing mistakes. And we're starting to see Crown perform a bit better, which then makes it opens up the whole map, because I've been saying every week, and I'm glad Nuddle said this, mid priority is just so important. And the loss of that for KSV was really destabilized the way that they could play, even with a safer jungler like Ambition. I also think Cuvée was having a few issues mid-split where some of his, I don't know if it was just a team communication thing, but he previously was just known for being this super strong team fighter and flanker, and it was not working out for KSV still. But in their more recent games, he's seen much more in sync with the team. He's performed a lot better, which also makes a huge difference. I don't even think that Ruler was performing particularly badly individually, and but now that their team fighting has improved, obviously he looks a bit better as well. So it's kind of like when they're actually communicating, even if it's the typical KSV thing where they're waiting to capitalize on their opponent's mistakes, especially when they have Ambition in, if they are allowed to play to that style, they're now winning games, which previously they just looked completely lost. So I don't know what the difference is between then and now in terms of like team communication. But it seems like having Ambition in for like as a steady jungler and not trying to switch out and rotate has really helped them. And also finding more picks for Crown and having him have a bit more mid priority is also super important.
And if I can add something to the mid priority, what's interesting is picks this split. It's Zoe and Vel'Koz, which to me are almost the same champion in a sense, where they don't really have the highest lane priority. They don't really run too well around the map. Zoe obviously can with her sleep, but she's got nerfed pretty hard. So it's like, to me, he was looking for an identity. He was looking for picks, as you said. Then Vel'Koz, yes, it can work. It stays very far in the back, but it's still a 110 champion. I think he went versus the Galio diving comp. I think the first time he showcased his Vel'Koz. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. It's like the way you talk about now and then, like when I watch Samsung in the grand final and in the semis, they relied on the mid control, but the grand final, they just played Malzahar 3 games in a row, had a perfect read on the meta, because Malzahar became the best mid in the game for the next 3 months. So it's like they had a read that no one else had in the world. But you talked about Cuvée, and one of his biggest strengths to me was how he played the side lane. And he either made a perfect adjustment towards his team or kept the pressure. And it's not just about his pressure, it's how they played around his pressure and how they fell back and never took any risk, baited a lot of Baron TPs, baited fights, gave him space for their team to actually play well around these picks. And to me, that was their mark of success, because at Worlds, I don't think they won any game with more than 8 kills. Everything was controlled. Everything was decided in advance. They were like, okay, we have pressure on side lane. We're going to have this type of engage that they can do on us. They disengage. They always knew how to play away with the Lee Sin. There was one game where perfect disengage. The Lee Sin kicked the only source of engage. They peel off. Cuvée takes inhib, and then the game just snowballs from that. So KSV, in a sense, to me, I would say are like looking for the identity, but mostly in the mid lane. Cuvée knows how to play the game. Like last weekend, he had a strong show off with his Gnar, like a very strong game. And I think they'll be probably one of the strongest team going into the playoffs if they can keep fixing their problems and keep looking for picks to enable their composition and team identity.
Okay. What would you say as some, obviously we haven't had you on the show before, so we haven't got your take on this, right? Anytime I watch KSV play, there's a part of me still can't like delete remembering how good Crown used to be and how it looked amazingly dominant, like it mechanically, and it would obviously have all these amazing laning phases with his best champions. Like now, when I watched him basically from the latter half of last year to now, it's actually bizarre to me that it's the same player. Like, I had a joke when they won Worlds, because he, like, had fuck all to do with it, pretty much. My joke was, like, Crown didn't win Worlds, Shadow did, because that was, like, what his name was when he used to play in Brazil back when no one gave a fuck about this guy. So, what do you think as an outsider? What is the issue that Crown has in this team? Has his game just completely fallen apart? What's the issue?
Well, sometimes it's not just about your game. It's about like your reputation in a sense. I will give the Faker example over here. It's like he had an aura of invincibility around him that allowed him to play matchups, losing matchups, and he would win them simply because people were scared to abuse the matchups the way it's supposed to be played. And to me, that's one of the biggest weaknesses that a lot of players have, how when they face someone that is known to be superior, they're going to move away from the conditions that make their winning matchup a winning matchup. And this is, to me, the core of mid lane. If you have a lane that is supposed to win, that is supposed to pressure, you're supposed to pressure. And if you can't, you're opposing the map for the other team. And I think Crown, in a sense, when you said was at his peak, people were maybe not as scared as him as they were a Faker, but he had a feeling of where, all right, you're going to try to outplay me, I will outplay you back. And once that goes down, sometimes you lose power, you lose control of some variables that can give you an edge in a lane. And when you look at him, that could be a reason. Like also, like you said, he's a little lost. Like the champion pool moved away from him a little. Like there's not that many Victor, Syndra, or Rihanna is coming back. His Azir was not his best champion. I'm looking at his stats. In 2017, he didn't even play Azir once. And in 2018, it's one of the best champion in pretty much in the game. So sometimes it's more than just his play. It could be mindset. It could be champion pool, meta. You always have to adapt. And this is the hardest part for people. Adapting to a patch not for Crown as a young player, obviously, but when you look at young teams, always have a harder time adapting to patch because they've seen less, they've experienced less, and they don't have the tools to always fall back. And when you sometimes get lost, in a sense, in terms of champion pool, you need time to find your identity. And like I said, he's playing Zoe Vel'Koz, which to me, he's trying to define himself as a player who can stay in the back, play safe in mid instead of playing up. And sometimes if you try to play too safe, well, I think versus KZ, you're never winning because it means you're never going past the mid lane or the mid of the mid lane, which means Peanut is going to be in your jungle getting vision half the time, almost the entire game. And that gives them just so much control in the game. And maybe he fixes that for the playoffs. I hope he does. But confidence is usually a big factor for people. And if he can find it back, maybe he'll be a player that will make KSV rise because, like you said, their bot lane is playing solid. Kuvi can just carry a game by himself, but the game starts from mid. So he needs to find his riddle to be able to get into the playoff in good shape for his team.
Right, Emily, when we talk about SK Telecom, I know why people want them to be back because obviously, they still have some legendary names. They have warped the landscape of LCK so hard that you do feel like, they have to be in the playoffs. Surely, like it doesn't feel the same if someone doesn't beat them to win the LCK, but they're obviously not back. And if you even look at the teams they were beating, I think some of those were reaches that people were like, oh, they've turned it around. Like, okay, KSV, it now again sounds like a good win, but that was KSV at their absolute worst when everything was going terribly, Then beyond that, it's not like they actually beat the top teams. They were beating, the Jinares of the world, the Rox Tigers. They weren't beating the elite teams. Admittedly, these were teams, some of them that were above SK Telecom, so okay, sure, that adds to a narrative that they're rising up the ranks again. But now that we've seen them go through the tough schedule, basically, where they had to play Kingzone and KT, who were the number 1 and number 2 teams, they didn't win a single game against any of these teams, and then now, to add insult to that, they have lost to BBQ. Where is SK Telecom now? And obviously, again, I have to add the context that they have, for some outside of the team inexplicable reason, just abandoned the Blossom project entirely in the back to black.
It makes me so sad because it started when Blossom got absolutely obliterated by Peanut, right? And so,
which is the classic Korean way, right? It's like, the sub jungler lost, get him out. I never want to see you in this town again. You'll never work in this scene again.
I am kind of worried about his confidence now that they just completely yanked him because in the following series against KT, someone actually asked me about this, about why they would play Blank. And I do think, even though I would rather see them play Blossom every time at this point, I do think playing Blank against KT specifically makes sense because Score is a very smart jungler. who would also be able to easily exploit a lot of Blossom's weaknesses. And Blank historically has done pretty well against Score. So I can see the logic behind starting him in that one series. But then continuing to commit to Blank is just, it breaks my heart, because I thought this team had finally been like, okay, we're going to focus on our rookie jungler. Yeah, sure, he makes some mistakes, but the team looks completely revitalized with him, and it was great. And that's not happening. And even like Untara had a game where he didn't even perform particularly poorly, but immediately Tal was in. And it just seems like they've returned back to making these swaps, and which means that they return back to the team that we saw previously, which is a team that will often just slowly lose, or make some gigantic mistakes around neutral objectives, which we saw them do. So it's so frustrating, because I just want them to commit to Blossom, I want them to commit to getting better in the long term, especially now that playoffs might be out of your reach. Yes. What do you have to lose? Because right now this team is not doing well in playoffs if they make it. Because they're a worse version of themselves previously last year. So it's so frustrating. Just play Blossom, please. Just do it. Especially on this patch, I feel like he's the kind of jungler that, yes, again, he's going to make rookie mistakes, but it's a patch that I think would be fairly good for him, in terms of being able to make some of those more aggressive moves, because you're having to go Tracker's Knife anymore. And SKT has always been a team that has historically been really good at clearing out vision, not just placing vision, but specifically defending their own vision and clearing out enemy vision around objectives, which would also help Blossom. So it's just really frustrating to see that they regressed back into turtle, we're going to get as far as we can with this lineup kind of thing. It's just really frustrating.
Right, Nuddle, if you are a fan of jungling, then this is the question I have to ask you about this. Because, okay, right, SK Telecom were already messing with the top lane as it was anyway. But there was I could see the logic to that, because it's something they've done for the last couple of seasons, where they've tried to have different options with what type of a top laner we play to make up for the fact they don't have a superstar top laner. Okay, they were winning games with Tal and with Untara, that's fine. But this Blossom removal, basically, in reinserting Blank, to me at least, is very weird, because as kind of Emily alluded to, Blossom was actually looking pretty good, he was a pretty decisive player. Meanwhile, Blank has had problems all year long, and actually I know a lot of analysts actually think he's terrible. I hear a lot of people criticising him for a lot of the games that he's played. What's your take on the jungle situation in SK Telecom?
Well, I think in terms of jungling, to me, stability is the key. You can't just put a jungler in and out and just say, all right, play the game with him, because the game always changes, the flow changes, and everything is based around them. So if you just think that playing yo-yo with jungler is a way to win the game, to me it's very suicidal, because your team just finds a new identity every time. And this is why, in terms of multi-man lineup, when you look at jungling stability, player stability, you usually get better results. And we can talk about Samsung, last year, when they won Worlds. It's they had the same lineup for a long time. And of course, you develop patterns. Maybe it was a good patch that just helped them, we talked about the Mazar pick. But in terms of jungling, it's the core. And if you just forget how you're supposed to evaluate the game, how you're supposed to advance, you're patting, you make one mistake and you're in trouble. And then the game just escalates in your face, because the moment maybe you lose your rates is the moment that top side is lost. The moment you lose your mid, then you lose all the top side. That's not something that happens too often for them, losing mid. But I think there is a big misconception in terms of how Faker seems to be left alone a little too much for how they went. So I don't know if you remember, they played Wolf in the jungle early in the split, as crazy as it sounds.
Oh, we
and
remember.
He literally just played mid. He literally just left base, warded everywhere mid, and the game started from that. So in terms of SKT, I can't really blame them for going back to Blank, because they're maybe just thinking short term versus long term. They think that the playoffs will give them a veteran, which I don't think they need. I think their objective, like you said at this point, should be to focus on next split. Try to build, try to make their jungler make mistakes so that he can learn and develop his talent. And if they're not willing to do that, like maybe next split, there'll be another 6 or 7 position team again. And this is team and organization decisions that you make with young player versus more experienced player. You can't always just say, all right, we're going to put this guy because of this reason. Sometimes they want to win, and they want to win now, or they want to win in 5 months, 3 months, when the best of 5 really matters. So in terms of their jungling, I think stability would be their key. And like you said, maybe it's time for them to just move to a new style and move to Blossom, make him learn, make new mistakes, make him face better junglers, because you never get the same value from facing score and scrims than you will on the stage. Everything is different, and I think he needs that experience if he really wants to reach the next level. I don't know if he's going to be the next level jungler for SKT, but if you never give him the chance, then what are you going to do in 3 months? You're just going to say, oh my god, Blossom's playing bad, so let's put blank, and you'll be stuck in the exact same boat again.
Right, I've noticed, Emily, that any time Faker makes let's say like a bizarre move in game, like a really weird chase, or he goes like too horny on a 1v1, because he's the best player ever, people do love to sort of be like, look, he's tilted, just like me in solo queue. It's like, 99% of the time you look at the example and you're like, no, he just went a bit too far, but that move he made when he was on Kassadin, when he chased into the base against BBQ, that just looked like full-blown tilt. That's like the sort of shit you do in solo queue, where it's like literally the best case scenario almost was that like he kills the other guy and he dies, but you don't actually gain anything in your match. Like, what... This is a really worrying sign, isn't it? I mean, this is BBQ's play. That wasn't like against KT or something, and it's like a really big game, and he needed to win so much. Are you concerned for SK Telecom as an org going forwards?
A bit, because I think, to your point, not just that specific play, and I don't even think it's like, oh man, Faker's tilted, like he's just, he's throwing out the entire team. But I do think he feels an immense amount of pressure to carry the team, right? And I think historically, he's always been a player who has benefited from kind of what Nuddle said, for having that swagger in lane, right? He plays too far forward, even when his jungler isn't there, because he gets in your face, and that makes you think like, maybe the jungler is there. Like, it makes you start second guessing yourself if you're a mid laner going up against him. And he is really, really exploited that in the mid lane. Like, he's always had that attitude of playing far up, and when the team has been punished for it, or every time SKT looks shaky, you notice a lot of the time people are suddenly saying, well, Faker's getting caught out. And it's not even necessarily that he's getting caught out, it's that he's doing similar things that he's always done in the past, but he's getting punished for it because people aren't buying into it anymore. And I think that a lot of these moves, not that fountain dive, but yes, a lot of the moves that we do see him make are things that he would do anyway in the past as well, because he is that type of player. So it's now that he's getting punished a bit more for it. One thing I do think that he's also been punished for more this split that has always been a little bit weird with him is some of his teleports. I know I keep bringing this up, but some of his teleports are just really wonky, and I never know whether it's like a miscommunication or something on the team. Also, to Nuddle's point, something that supports his jungle theory is how Samsung used their junglers, not this split, because they waffled between Haru and Ambition a bit before settling on Ambition, but last year, when they realized that they needed to play Ambition, they immediately just stuck with Ambition. And then in the spring, they stuck with Haru because Crown still had insane mid priority. He had a lot of his picks, and Haru was just able to invade. So that's something else that supports his point as well, because that's two different team identities for Samsung that are like related but slightly different and based around how they play around their jungler and mid laner.
Right, being as this is going to be, I mean, I know technically right now there's still like some sort of mathematical possibility they can make it into the playoffs, but I'm going to go ahead and call it already, because like, let's face it, the teams above them have to win basically like one game or something mentally, so it's like so unlikely to me that it's going to happen. I think they're not going to do it personally. So if it were in a world where SK Telecom doesn't even make playoffs, forget win the split, which is what they used to always do pretty much all the time, don't even make playoffs, do they have to make some sort of a roster move before next split, or can they take this team of subs and all and somehow work with this team, and can it actually be good enough to go to Worlds? What do you think, Nuddle?
Well, the thing is, it's not about being good enough to go to Worlds. It's the thing, will they be good enough to beat KZ, KT, KSV? And to me, that's a no. Because it would take probably months for them to reach a level where KZ is already playing at right now. And then KZ is still going to have those same amount of months to keep improving as a team. And I think they are very far from their potential, because their bot lane can do much better than they are. Even though they're playing smart, they're playing safe, I think they can still improve. And imagine just KZ in 3 months from now on scarier meta, on different patches. I think they would adapt and just be so much better. But once you look at SKT and you just think of Faker, to me, that's still their identity. And the thing is, right now in League of Legends, to me, mid lane wins game without winning game. In a sense that your mid game is pretty much your most important role in the game, simply because of mid priority and how it affects the map. But you almost never see mid lanes solo carrying game anymore. If you look at the end of this, like the end score on most games, you'll see the ADCs. Just look at Generic, for example, where Teddy is like, it's not hello, we're Generic and this is Teddy. It's hello, we're Generic and I play for Teddy. That's literally how it is for them. And it's like, once you look at teams that can control mid and then use a priority elsewhere, I think right now SKT, with the players they have in, don't have the tools to match the other teams. And I think for this reason, they would probably need roster moves. But I mean, what kind of roster moves can you get? Who's going to be a free agent after this split? It's like KZ, you don't think of any change. Maybe KT could be making some moves. Maybe in terms of, we don't know, maybe, well, you can't even change the mid, so at this point it doesn't matter. So it's like they would have to get rid of Smeb for SKT to have a different mentality. To me, it makes no sense. And that's like, when I looked at their game, I was looking at their top laner stats, because like I said, to me, a lot of the game is played around the top lane. They have the worst stat in the top lane. Like their first blood rate, their death, their kill participations are low. Their first brick rate is inexistent in their team. And that just means that they're losing out on so much pressure on the map that they can't abuse anywhere else. And it's not just about progressing, because like I said, everyone's going to keep progressing. Everyone's going to keep finding answers, and everyone's going to keep understanding how Faker plays the game. And through the years, with better analysts, better coaching staff, the game optimization and the amount of mistake you can do just goes down every time. And it's almost close to perfection if you want to be able to win in this reality that is League of Legends right now in Season 8.
Okay. Right. Now let's talk. Right, the last team we're going to talk about is going to be Rox Tigers, because even though the other ones, there has been some interesting ups and downs between some of the other teams, it's cruel and unusual punishment to make people who don't get paid to watch LCK talk too in depth about MVP and fucking BBQ, all of us. So we'll have our own. Next week, Emily, we'll just do a 2-man show again. That's
Requiem for all of the teams that were eliminated.
We'll go through all the gory details of what has to go there in the Hellraiser episode, right? But for this one, let's finish up on Rox Tigers. So, Emily, Rox Tigers is a team that still is a bit confusing, because I at least thought their identity had settled, where it's like, right, they're at least the team that's sort of like, they're the mid-table benchmark. They beat all the teams below them, and they don't beat the teams above them. Now, the second part of that held true. When they played the best teams recently, they lost to them. Okay, understandable. But losing to MVP, if you're Rox Tigers, that's kind of a bit of a blow, you know? That should have been a gimme for you, surely.
Yeah, that was a frustrating series to watch. It was a lot of it came down to like when we're talking about how teams are executing, you know how back in, I think it was the third episode, we had LS on, the second or third episode. Sure. He talked about how he just saw so many teams that were pushing when they didn't need to. And that was kind of what ended up happening with Rox. In those games, and actually again,
like when you have a lead and you could just let it continue to get bigger and win the game anywhere.
Well, like when to hold back or when to like push a siege, especially when you're sieging the base, is like super important to know. And Rox really focused on that, not only against MVP, but actually also against Kingzone. They had a surprisingly good showing against Kingzone. in their series earlier this week, and a lot of why they lost did come down to some of those base sieges or just overreaching when they really couldn't fight themselves out of, like when they get engaged upon, they couldn't fight their way out of it. Some of that is also just because, again, like, we've never held up this Rox team as a team that is super, super strong mechanically across the board, right? They're not going to be outplaying you individually necessarily. And I also do think we saw a lot of Lava's weaknesses specifically on this new patch. Now that he can no longer play Zoe, now that they're not prioritizing like a Corki or a Galio, usually because Galio's banned. For him, I think it's been a little bit more difficult for him. We saw some really glaring and visible mechanical misplays by him that were really unfortunate as well. So I feel like that's something that's kind of always been in the background, but now that it's a new patch and they didn't necessarily adjust as quickly, that is also something that's starting to shine through for Rox.
Okay. Right, what do you think of the Rox Tigers, Nuddle? I mean, a team obviously that doesn't have a massive name value for the players. The squad obviously has nothing to do with the old Rox Tigers, but a team that actually, you look at their placing now, and they've been fairly consistently I think they've been in the top half of the table for like most of the season actually overall. So pretty in context of who they are, I think pretty respectable season. What do you think of this team?
Well, the thing is, it's like when you look at the ranking, sometimes it can be deceiving because, like we said, they can beat the worst teams, but then there's always the good teams. And it's like they're a team that has been fighting every game just to be able to beat those bad teams. And when you do that, and sometimes, like we said earlier, it goes with momentum, it goes with the patch. And if you look at their record, it's not looking too bright in the last 2 weeks on this patch, where I think it's almost every losses in their last recent series.
Yes.
So adapting can be very hard for most teams, and I think they will take time, and I think Lava can play well, and like you said, he's been exposed, so he will probably need time to develop his Telia in a sense, which is a very strong champion. When Galio goes down in value or just gets banned, I mean, it just stops sometimes the interaction that you have with your jungler, where some teams can use the Galio proactively and some teams use it defensively to just control how the game is being played, where the game is being played, and control the pace of the game. And until they've really found their balance in terms of meta, and until maybe Zoe gets buffed again, I think they will be fighting to just get that 5th spot. I think they're almost guaranteed 5th spot, are they? No, they're still fighting very hard.
They're fighting, yeah.
And if I check correctly, they're facing Kongnu Monster, KSV, and Jin. So they don't have the toughest, but can they really play fast versus Jin? And that is, to me, their biggest question mark. Because if it comes down to a decisive series versus Jin and Teddy, I don't know if they'll have the punch in a sense, because Telia is one of those champions that can just accelerate the game, but he has a losing record so far on Telia. So will they be able to abuse that component of the game to just get Jin away from their momentum in game? And that's something that I will see very soon, and I can't wait to see, because the 5th spot is very interesting because it's experience. It's always experience. Like Rox Tigers don't have the most experienced player, and they'll be looking for that chance to just play into the playoffs, get more games. One more best of 5 could be the difference between going into next split. I forgot how the LCK system works. I don't think you get points for finishing 5th, right? Into the
circuit points thing.
Into the point system for was. I don't think they do. But overall,
I don't think so. Let me check though.
No, I forgot that. Because that's always relevant, because any win and any playoff spot they can get will be important. And as for Rox, if they can find a stability within their next 3 series and do what they did all split long, to be honest, which is to beat the worst teams. Because if you look, they've been Barbecue, they've been Kongnu Monster, they've beaten almost everyone at some point, and this week they actually challenged KZ. So going to the last week, I think they really need to use that energy, which they challenged KZ, and we're just maybe a few decisions away from taking a 2-0 series versus them.
Apparently, you do get 10 circuit points if you come 5th, but it's not very much, obviously. I mean, that's
you just need to win.
Marginal. Okay, so actually, yeah, that's the thing we'll close on then. So there is this bizarre scenario where it's not actually decided yet what the last playoff team will be. And we're in a situation where these teams, it depends on the final record of who they play. Now, if you're SK Telecom, the bad news is you play KSV right away and they can basically just kill you dead instantly, and it's almost over at that point in time because you need everything to go totally wrong in all the other games for the other team. The Rox one is a bit of a sad one because on the one hand, their schedule is pretty doable. I mean, basically they've got Kongdu Monster, that should be a win. You've got KSV, okay, that's tough, but KSV's not unbeatable. And then you've got to close out Jin Air, which is possible to win. The problem is, as you said though, they've been losing a whole bunch of games recently. You've just lost to MVP. I mean, that could have been your playoff spot right there if you just won that game, you know. So what do you think, Emily? Which of these teams gets the last spot?
Oof. If Rox can shore up their... So even as they are, even with Lava still trying to find a few more champions in mid that they can play around, if they shore up some of their decision-making around these base sieges, then they should be able to sneak in there. But that's the big sticking point for me, for Rox, is can they do that? But
their early game have been better. So if they can, like you said, just learn to finish the game, learn to win in the sense. It's always the last push that's the hardest, and if they can get it, they could have their chance because SKT needs to at least win all three to almost have a chance, or the other team has to go 1 and 2. And
when I'm looking at these teams, they're the most consistent, and I always like to side with the most consistent team, despite the fact that they've gotten off to a really rough start on this patch. I did think they looked a lot better the other night against Kingzone. So, I mean, just shore up those base sieges, learn how to close a game a lot more cleanly, don't take fights when you don't need to, and they should be all right.
Right, one last topic I want to close the episode with, because we can tie this into CBLOL and the Brazilian region, which is that CBLOL, when you get to the playoff format, is using the same format that LCK uses, which is the classic Korean gauntlet system, where your placing in the league puts you into the gauntlet run, where if you're first, you're already in the final. If you're third, you have to play fourth to get to second. You know, it's that sort of like you climb up the ladder or you get beaten, and then the teams that are already there are the ones that continue on. Now, let's just take this as an abstract first. What do you think about this as an actual format, Nuddle? Because, I mean, on the one hand, if you're a team in the position your team's in, it's kind of great for you, right? Worst case scenario, you can finish second. Whereas, you know, if you think about some of the past OGN tournaments, for example, you could be the number one team, and in theory, you could finish 5th to 8th. That's possible with the old format of a single elim 8-team bracket. So what do you think of this as a format?
Well, to me, I think this format is not as relevant to CBLOL than it could be like in Korea. Because in Korea, they play double round robin, all best of 3. Like they play, let me see, like each team, I think I've played more than 30 games. It might sound crazy. I think this split as a team, we've maybe played 16 games, 18 at most.
Yeah.
And to me, because of this, in a sense, for just the development, like for my team, I mean, I'm not going to complain. We're in final and we're 3 games away from MSI with a team that came from Challenger Series. So, I mean, obviously, I'm never going to say I hate this formula. But in terms of development for a region, I think playing more games, giving teams the opportunity to develop would be a lot more relevant for a region like CBLOL. And I think this is something that overall the region is missing out. But if you look at Korea, I think that over the past years, there was so much stability between Split 1 and Split 2 over the good teams, which usually can have a very similar lineup going from spring to summer, that the stability in the region makes it so that the best teams are usually rewarded. Other than KT, obviously, because they always find ways to choke in the playoffs. But if you look at Korea, you can't really say that there are teams who should have been at Worlds who were not at Worlds. And obviously, like I said, it's KT. They found ways not to go. But the format...
You might got a bit low, by the way. I think you might moved away from that.
Sorry.
There we go.
So overall, I think for their region, it's a lot more relevant because, let's be honest, KZ in the final, everyone's going to be happy because no matter what's going to happen, you're going to get the best team in the region in the final. And whoever else is going to be there is most likely going to be the second best team because KSV would have to beat KT, Afreeca Freecs, and SKT or Rox to be in the final. And then it means that whoever's that winner is going to have to be facing KT and then Afreeca Freecs if they finish second. So just see, to me, how relevant for Korea it can apply when a team is that dominant. But if we had like a much closer splits, where let's say KZ was 10-4 and there were 3 teams battling for first, I would say the format would make a lot less sense because it could just have been, oh, we had a bad patch. Now we are second or third, but they've been consistent over the patch. And to me, like, they have their place over there and no one can deny that from them.
Sure. Right, okay, Emily, I will actually opt out at the end of this episode and say that, like a little rat, I'll just do my own Thorin's Thoughts video on this exact topic because I could do like 10 minutes myself. But I just want to get your thoughts. What's your thoughts on the gauntlet system? Obviously, I mean, a lot of people do fondly remember the OGN champion system, but listen, there's nostalgia involved in it, Sarah. What's your take on it? Like, first of all, as an abstract, just as a format, and then secondly, specific to Korea, what do you think of it as a Korean format?
So, as one of those people who can have like the sepia tinged nostalgia glasses on, the thing that I do not like about the format is that I feel as both a fan and just someone who really loves watching Korea, watching this region, watching the teams, I feel like we get robbed of some really amazing best of 5 series. Sure. So that's my like bias entering into it, right? I'll put that out up front. But I also think Nuddle makes a really good point in that in a double round robin that is best of 3s, it's very rare that you're not going to get the like best team in the top because you will get the most consistent team across the split. Yes. And I can't think of a split where I felt like we didn't get the proper team in the final, except for maybe the first split. Like the first year actually was kind of wonky when they were still adjusting to it because we got Rox, who had kind of dropped off on the latest patch, and SKT had kind of slowly risen throughout that first spring. And then we had a similar situation with KT Rolster, who got absolutely obliterated by SKT in the finals. But other than the first kind of like adjustment year where, you know, the region itself was still kind of scrambling to adapt to the loss of sister teams, a new format that was a league instead of a tournament, that whole thing. I can't say that we haven't had like the right team in that final spot or like a really poor stratification of what happened in the regular season. So in that regard, in terms of regular season being a seeding for playoffs, it works, in my opinion, to put it into the gauntlet, despite the fact that as a fan, I don't necessarily like it. And I do also think it can lead to some complications, not with this Kingzone team, because they are more flexible than last year's Kingzone team. But obviously the example that people like to bring up is the Longzhu gaming of last year, where they only played one style and they only played that one best of 5 in the finals. And then Samsung were able to exploit some of their weaknesses and beat them at Worlds.
I'm Kelsey Moser, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel, where no sandbagging goes unscrutinized.
This video was supported by Dean Tanglis, Michael Allaire, Andreas Westerlund, Alex Adams, Gman, Twch, Jerky's Minion, Gianfranco Ingrata, Anthony, Bash, TGreb, Yordan, Tsenkov, Daniel Yordanov. Want to suggest guests or topics for my content? Well, keep it G-rated and unlock the code to the streets, gaining exclusive access via the Patreon link below. The Scrilluminati grows daily.